Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this event. My name is Mike Sandler. I'm the chair of the board of FASTA, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. We're a nonprofit group based in Ireland, but I am based in the United States. And I've been selected by our partner, Equal Right, to help be the facilitator for this event. We're really excited to have you all here. We have representatives from all over the world, and it's just a really exciting launch for a couple different things today. So part one, we're going to be launching the Cap and Share Climate Alliance, which was started by FASTA and Equal Right. And it's a very exciting event or exciting alliance that's going to be coming together, and we'll hear more about it in a little bit. And part two of today's event here is going to be Equal Right's launch of a Cap and Share proposal. And you'll hear more about that in the second part of the event. And the first part will be about a half hour. Second part will be about an hour. And don't worry, you will have time to ask questions. We're going to be doing a moderated Q&A through the chat starting in a little over an hour from now. So please take notes and stay engaged. And we're excited to turn this into a great conversation. And so I think with that, I would like to hand it over to Harjeet Singh to hear some of his words to kick off our meeting. Harjeet.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's my absolute pleasure to chair this event and such an important conversation and the launch of Cap and Share. So it would be really great to be part of this event. I don't have to tell you how we are living through the poly crisis. It's not just the climate crisis that we are dealing with. We are looking at biodiversity crisis. We are facing energy crisis, food crisis. And at the same time, we are seeing conflicts around the world are increasing. And we must recognize that when we talk about the impacts of this poly crisis, it's not being borne equally across the globe. And we also know that it's the financial system and the way trade is being done, the way globalization has been implemented. It's at the very core of the poly crisis that we are facing at this moment. And vulnerable communities who are not responsible for these crises are the ones who are facing the brunt, and they are being disproportionately impacted. And that's why when we talk about some of these crises and our response, it's not just about climate justice, it's also about social justice, it's about environmental justice. And how do we really tackle the core issues of inequalities that exist in our society. So for us, when we talk about social justice, and we know that how financial system has been responsible for these crises, we have to talk about finance. And at the same time, we also know finance is needed to deliver justice across the board. And thankfully, this issue of finance has been raised politically in the last few months. And thanks to Mia Motley for really echoing some of the challenges that we have been facing and putting a spotlight on this financial system that has caused all these crises. And at the same time, when we speak of climate justice, and 30 years have passed, we've only been talking about it. Finance has not been mobilized to a level at which it is needed. We knew how important it is. The convention, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that we got in 1992, and in the last several decades, we've just been discussing. We know what is needed. We know who caused the problem in the first place, but still we have not been able to tackle the issue head on. When we talk about the cause of the crisis, and many of these crises, especially the role of fossil fuel industry in not only first causing denial, then at the same time causing disinformation and spreading disinformation and causing delay of action around the world. And at this moment, when we need to tackle these crises, fossil fuel industry is profiting from these many crises that people are facing. And here we are not having sufficient finance to respond across the spectrum, be it mitigation in terms of reducing our emissions. We see climate impacts increasing around the world, but there is no support going to communities to be prepared to deal with those impacts. And now in the last few years, the issue of loss and damage has become extremely important. How to help communities recover from these climate impacts. And when we talk about finance, we need trillions and not billions of dollars. And when we look at the real money being delivered, and particularly new and additional finance, when it comes to climate, we are seeing the same ODA being double counted. You'd be frustrated and angry to know how we still do not have even a definition of climate finance in the UNFCCC space. So imagine how that money is being counted, and that's exactly the reason we have not been able to take action in countries. On one hand, rich countries, a bunch of rich countries and corporations who are responsible for the disproportionate amount of emissions in the atmosphere, they have not taken fair share of climate action. At the same time, they have not delivered finance. So we see a situation where lack of finance is actually hampering our action, and we are not able to even implement actions to reduce the impact of these disasters. At the same time, we see economies and workers stuck with the same fossil fuel-based economy. What we need urgently is a just transition. We have been talking about it, but the finance has not been delivered. And I can tell you the very recent UNFCCC session, what we call subsidiary body session in Bonn in June, we saw again the so-called agenda fight, where rich countries wanted to discuss ambition to put more and more pressure on developing countries to do more, when the reality is that it's developing countries who are far more ambitious in their plans and their political will than developed countries who have more responsibility, at the same time, all kinds of resources that are needed, yet they are not moving forward. Yet they are trying to pile up pressure on developing countries to do more, very well knowing how they face multiple challenges. They have to take millions and millions of people out of poverty. They're facing climate disasters, which is reversing the development gains they have made over the last few years. No support going to them in terms of even technology transfer or providing finance so that they can shift the trajectory and move away from fossil fuels and adopt a just transition. What they get is only pressure to do more and more and more. And when developing countries wanted to tie ambition with finance, the blame was put back on developing countries that they don't want ambition. That's the kind of vicious game that's being played. And at the core of it, as I said, is finance or lack of finance. And rich countries really don't want to deliver that. So we need to put a spotlight on why we have not gained much traction over the last few decades. Why, despite knowing what the crisis is, who is causing the problem? Again, the fossil fuel industry, which, as I said, is gaining from the crisis, making obscene profits to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, and not really delivering on their commitments when it comes to adopting renewable energy or moving away from their business model. And we see a clear nexus of fossil fuel industry and governments. And we have recently heard how UK is issuing more and more licenses for more expansion of oil and gas. That's the reality we are living in. And we really have to challenge this narrative. And that's why conversations like today are going to be extremely important on one, how do we move away from fossil fuels? How do we make sure that we make polluters pay? And how do we use finance to mitigate, to reduce emissions, at the same time help communities to be prepared to deal with these disasters? So finance is extremely, extremely key. We have a number of opportunities, and this year is particularly critical as we see conversations at COP28 are going to be around global stocktake, where while we know where we are, but at the same time, science has told us, IPCC report came out this year, but we now need leaders to turn that warning into a plan. And that can happen at COP28 if we put enough pressure. We also have discussions on global goal and adaptation. We have a conversation on loss and damage fund to be concluded, but at the same time, we are going to a petro state. So the conversation around how do we move away from fossil fuels, how do we have a plan in place, and how do we make sure that we fund that transition is going to be extremely important. So we have multiple challenges, but at the same time, we have opportunities that we can leverage. And again, as I said, conversations like today are going to be extremely important to turn these challenges into opportunities and discuss what we can do together to make that happen. And climate justice, as we know, is not just a slogan, it's a call to action that we are going to have. And that's what we are going to hear a lot more from the co-founders of this initiative and also the discussant. And we would love to have you involved in this process. Thank you very much. I'll hand over back to Mike.
Thank you, Harjeet. That was great. And you laid out all the important topics and some of the urgency that we feel about this and frustration because of all the years that have passed and all the ink that has been spilled and electrons in the internet going by, but the lack of a plan or the lack of cohesive equity proposal. And I think that's where we're coming from today. So again, my name is Mike Sandler. I'm the chair of the board of FASTA, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability based in Ireland. I'm the facilitator today. And I will just say a few words now about the Cap and Share Climate Alliance, which has come together. And I want to thank Laura and Sid from Equal Right and some of the other partners that are making this alliance happen. And we're also making a pitch for additional groups to join this alliance. And we think that there's some really exciting ideas that we're putting forward. And I'll just say a few words about that. I also want to thank a lot of the people that came before us, because in a way, we're not really inventing anything. The pieces of the puzzle have been there all along. The ideas of climate justice and equity are there. But when you see a sign that says climate justice now, what does that really mean? And so we're trying to put that into some more concrete fashion. But a lot of people have great ideas and not everyone's exactly 100% in alignment. But if we're 90% in alignment, I think that's good enough and the details can come later. So I do want to acknowledge some of the thinkers where I got some of the ideas, or at least brought me into the cap and share concept. Richard Douthwaite, Peter Barnes, John Jopling, and I even think Aubrey Meyer made a contribution. Those are some books out there that can help bring people along into the cap and share world. And cap and share is a platform for equity, but it can only exist in a world where we're all in this together and where we believe the upstream fossil fuel companies must pay an escalating carbon price. That cap is what creates the price. The compensation goes back to everyone. And that's the share. The share is that the funds are going back to people. And there's variations on details and design, and you'll hear more about that or read more about that, and more information will be coming out on the website for the Alliance. We don't need to agree on everything, but we have certain principles we want to agree on. The carbon cap, as I mentioned, that moves the extraction and importation of fossil fuels down to zero. No offsets, so we don't think that tree planting is gonna be sufficient to cover for the continuing ongoing emissions. A carbon charge applied to companies that extract or import fossil fuels, and that's where the cap gets turned into a price. Cash dividends that are paid out directly to people, and I always refer to that as similar to basic income, and that's maybe how we first connected with Equal Right in their previous incarnation. Further mechanisms that address climate justice, global justice, and intergenerational justice, and citizen oversight, because people need to be involved in the governance aspect as well. So I'm going to end with a few questions before we pass it on to our 7 additional co-founding groups, which is so exciting to me. Can we create a fair and just system that phases out fossil fuels and prevents the full cost from falling on the poorest people? Can we create an income stream that will help people adjust to a new low carbon economy? Can we create connections between global north and global south that will allow us to work together in a world of abundance and not scarcity? I'm so glad that you all are here, because I mean, this is what sort of makes me feel like we can do it. And in recognition that some countries that industrialized 100 years ago have emitted more carbon and must allow space for others to share in the modern affluence as well. So finally, I kept saying finally, I want to make a pitch to the well-intentioned NGO community outside of this call. Can we come together over these principles and work to build institutions? So we're doing more than just saying climate justice now. We can say cap and share now. That's a more specific ask. Climate dividends for all, and other slogans that we'll come up with and that you will come up with. We can send youth delegates and young people to the COP and stir up trouble and make this campaign successful so people will think it's just common sense and wonder what took us so long. Okay, so that's what I have to say. I'm going to pass it along for some quick statements from our various founders. And I'm going to start with my colleague, Caroline from FASTA. Then we'll hear from Equal Right, and then The Future We Need in India, been very helpful all along the way here. Autonomy in the UK, DRC Climate Change Network, Global Redistribution Advocates, and the Abel Musumali Foundation. So we're really excited. Everyone's going to get a chance to speak here. And then everyone else, please feel free to think of your questions, and we'll get to those at the very end. So Caroline, would you like to start us off from FASTA, and we'll just go down the list? Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Delighted to see so many people. My name's Caroline Whyte, and I do research and advocacy for FASTA, which is the same NGO that Mike's involved with. It's the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. And so it's an ecological economics think tank, and we're based in Ireland. FASTA is an Irish word, but I'm actually sitting in France right now. And the very first ideas about cap and share were developed by people in FASTA's climate group about 20 years ago now. And Mike already mentioned Richard Douthwaite, and there was another early advocate called Will Howard, and they both sadly passed away some years ago, and they would be so thrilled to see such an interesting mixture of people here today discussing this. And another very encouraging thing for them would have been the fact that the IPCC for the first time mentioned cap and share last year in its working group report number 3, mentioning that there's a framework that's rooted in the precautionary principle, reflecting the need to guarantee that sufficient significant emissions reduction will take place, and within a framework of justice, very strong emphasis on justice. And there are lots of different variations of cap and share. We're going to be hearing about different kinds in the next while. But as Mike says, we have a lot of common ground, important common ground. They all include the upstream cap. They all include a strong emphasis on justice and equity. So I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation today and your questions later. And I'm going to pass over to Sid from Equal Right. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sydney, and I'm the Senior Campaign Manager for Equal Right, and I'm on the climate justice element of cap and share, where we really want to see communities affected by climate change getting the dividends from the climate initiatives that are being done, especially through extractives. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rahul Basu, the founder of The Future We Need, a global movement to make intergenerational equity foundational for civilization. In short, we see natural resources as a shared inheritance, usually owned by the state as a trustee for the people and especially future generations. Climate instability and global heating is a violation of intergenerational equity. We see the climate and the remaining space for emitting greenhouse gases as a finite global commons. We are therefore keen to see a cap set on greenhouse emissions. The charges from these emissions should be invested, in our minds, through a global future generations fund, potentially in the energy transition and achieving sustainability more generally. The real income of the fund should be distributed equally as a global commons dividend. We benefit from the dividend, future generations benefit from retaining a sane climate, as well as will inherit the fund and receive a commons dividend in their turn. We are thrilled that CASCA has been formed to investigate this amongst other approaches to this civilization-threatening problem. I'm going to pass it on to Bill from Autonomy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rahul. Hi, everyone. Will Stronge here, Director of Autonomy. We're a research organisation based across the UK, but also we have people in Brazil and in Ireland as well. we focus on the future of work, welfare, and climate, basically. And I'm very happy to say we've been working with Laura for about a year from Equal Right, and we're happy to be a member of this coalition. We've been putting out research on similar issues before. I've actually had Rahul at one of our events on kind of climate funds, global commons, and so on. So these are really issues that we care about quite a lot. We do a lot of kind of quant-based research, but also lots of engagement with those who are affected by these issues as well. I think what's really significant about this initiative, and one which we're very happy to be a part of, is that it's so rare that you have something which, you know, thinks big, thinks in coordination, and then also thinks with a plan in mind. And I think obviously thinking big can be quite daunting, and I think we're all, you know, very well aware of the kind of localism where we all kind of work in our little patch over here and silos over there, but coordinating at scale is something that really needs to happen. And so hats off to Equal Right for kind of putting this together, as well as also everyone else I've had the pleasure to meet over the last few months in building this coalition. I look forward to discussion about the paper and around kind of what is proposed here. But I think just want to finally just mention this idea of having detail and having a plan, because equally daunting is having some idea about what the demand is, what the detail is, and how things are going to work. And I think it can be easily overlooked, you know, because of political strategies, you know, to some extent takes precedent. But having a plan, I think, is really, really valuable. And I look forward to kind of stress testing that and hearing what everyone's thoughts are on what has been kind of what we've come up with, basically. So I will leave it there and pass on to Appolinaire.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mr. Appolinaire Zagabe from the DRC Climate Change Network. So the DRC Climate Change Network is a platform of more than 40 organizations based in the DRC. And we are the chapter of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, responding to the climate justice issues which the African countries are victims. So being part of this alliance, it's a response to the call of the African communities which are affected by the climate crisis in order to advocate for their rights, so every developing country can gain the equal rights, like we are saying here in this launch of the campaign. So, and for this reason, I'll call all the African countries to join in mass this campaign, so we can own it as in African countries, which are mostly more affected by the climate crisis. Thank you very much. I hand over to the next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adrien Fabre, founder of Global Redistribution Advocates. I want to thank a lot Laura and everyone else here who've done a fantastic job at bringing us together for this cap and share proposal and detailing a very detailed paper. At GRA, we advocate for a closed version of cap and share, as well as two other global policies, one global wealth tax and a global climate assembly. We're doing research, academic research that has shown very strong support in every country in favor of these policies. So there is hope that the governments will soon take up what their population supports. And we're also doing research on the economic incidents and implications and how to conceive these policies. And we're also advocating for cap and share and or other policies to governments throughout the world. So yes, I'm really hoping that this alliance will bring a new momentum to the climate movement and that will advance solutions to the climate and the poly crisis. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon from Zambia. My name is Abel Musumali. I'm the CEO and founding chairman for the Abel Musumali Foundation. This is a humanitarian organization that was formed to help respond to humanitarian needs in the country, and also targeting communities and individuals that have been impacted by climate change. And as you're aware that climate change, comes with different impacts. One of them being, failure in terms of crop productivity. And in our setup as Zambia, most of our smallholder farmers, about 2 million smallholder farmers, depend on rain-fed, kind of agricultural system. So any disturbance, any bad weather in this regard has got a huge impact on the agricultural productivity. And because of that, quite a number of communities actually have experienced low yield. And those are some of the families and communities that which we are trying to target and help them with, relief food to some extent, and also a provision of clean water and sanitation. Climate change is very important, and it's an issue of concern for us. In as much as COP27, we celebrated about the agreement or the decision to establish the loss and damage fund, but the big question is the form at which this fund will take, the structure of this fund. Who is going to make pledges to this fund? Where will money come from? Who is going to manage this fund, and who is going to be eligible to access such kind of fund? So these are issues of concern, and also we are continuing to lobby and advocate so that clear decisions at COP28 are made, so that issues of climate justice, not only are they on paper, but also they should be seen as a reality on the ground in terms of those that have not caused much of this damage. We need to see that they are receiving the much needed help. And one last important point from my side is we'd like to see, price, when it comes to issues of carbon trading. We need a standardized price because in the Kyoto Protocol, if you remember, about 2% of certified emission reductions, that fund was going towards the adaptation fund, and it did very little in terms of providing adaptation measures and building resilient in the most affected communities. But in the Paris Agreement, moving forward, we need a global pricing mechanism that is favorable and fair, so that carbon projects that are happening in developing countries should reflect a win-win situation, so that developing countries are able to leverage on carbon, carbon pricing through mitigation measures to be able to finance their locally led adaptation measures. Thank you so much, and I don't know who is the next person.
Thank you, Abel. I'm going to step back in then, and that was so great, and I was so glad to hear all the different perspectives coming together, because that's what the Alliance is about. We're going to all bring something to the table, and the details are important, but also the big picture and the principles are what really bring us together, and I think what will drive our movement and help us be successful. And I want to just say a couple words before I hand it off to the second part of our event today. But I see, all the continents are represented. I don't know if we have Antarctica, but that'll be at the next meeting. But this is what will make us successful. And I would like to make a pitch to those of you that aren't part of the Alliance yet, and we're brand new. Today was the first day, really, that you can join. But I would like to ask you to consider joining the Alliance and to go to the Cap and Share Climate Alliance website. That'll be posted in the chat here. Read up on the principles, reach out to whatever group invited you here, for them to tell you more about it. Have some conversations. We're okay having the difficult conversations. Some folks will be inside the tent and some people will be outside, and that's okay. But yeah, and then reach out to your networks and let them know, you attended this meeting and that you heard about this alliance, and let more folks know. And there will be time to connect at the future COP meetings or other regional events. And there will be some follow-up events to this event where each of the partners will present kind of their own take on cap and share. And we're working on one for FASTA that'll be in the fall. But the first follow-up event is right now. So we're going to go straight into it. And Equal Right has a very exciting paper that they've put together, and I think Autonomy may have worked on that as well. And so we're going to just shift gears right now. Save your questions on Cap and Share Climate Alliance, and we'll address those at the end. But I think we're going to go straight over to it. And it says here, Chair's introduction, introducing Equal Right. So Laura, is that you, or do you want to help pass this on to the next person?
Hi, yep, I can jump in there. Thank you so much, everybody. I am going to share my screen, which I will do in as smooth a way as possible. For a moment. Well, I practiced this beforehand and tried to get it slick. There we are. Okay. And let me present this slideshow. Okay, so my name's Laura. I am the Executive Director of Equal Right. We work on climate justice without borders and economic justice without borders as a global justice organization. The cap and share proposal that I'm about to present is the result of partnership work between us and other members of the Cap and Share Climate Alliance. And in particular, we've worked with Autonomy and their economists to develop some of the economic analysis that you're about to see. So cap and share is a proposed international system. It aims to achieve a safe climate coupled with economic justice. As has been mentioned, it was invented in 2004 by economists at FASTA, and a number of proposals have been put forward. So this one is our particular flavor within the family. It includes some features like a People's Fund, which are not included in all cap and share visions, but they all share the same ultimate goal, which is a safe climate and economic justice. Cap and share obviously isn't the whole answer to climate justice. However, it is designed to complement and in a lot of cases to enable and facilitate other climate justice initiatives and priorities. So things like fossil fuel non-proliferation, the Green New Deal, and compensation for loss and damage, all of those priorities would be supported by cap and share. So the really key message that I want to get across in this presentation is this, which is that whatever you're working on, you probably need cap and share. It's a bit cheeky to say it, but we believe that this could be a really central system for the climate justice movement. The reason is it can provide a backdrop of both regulation and redistributive climate finance. So it's about the money. This can provide the money that is necessary to achieve other vital climate justice goals, all of the things that are currently your top priorities. So it provides a practical vision for how fossil fuels can actually be kept in the ground, and it provides a costed mechanism for funding the global Green New Deal and for providing climate grants and not loans and compensation to the South. And through both of those mechanisms, it then provides a sustainable global income that provides cash dividends. So this is vital for adaptation at the household level, for compensating people directly for their losses, and for ending extreme poverty, which is, of course, it's a symptom of climate injustice that's hardly ever talked about in climate debates, but it's obviously directly related. So this diagram kind of tries to explore those ideas. So I hope you're finding the work that you do in one of these circles around the edge. And I hope through this presentation, you'll come to understand the overlap and with cap and share and how cap and share can support your work. I'm going to show this diagram again at the end, but first I want to explain a bit more about the mechanics of cap and share. So this system, as we have envisaged it, has 6 elements. I wish I could make it simpler, but climate justice for the world turns out not to be very simple. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn to explain how the different parts come together to achieve the climate justice goals that we set out for. So first of all, we need a cap on fossil fuel extraction. The goal with any climate justice proposal, the first goal has to be to keep fossil fuels in the ground. So we are proposing a legally binding cap on fossil fuel extraction that would need to be put in place by a global authority. That could be a new or an existing one. And that would be applied via a compulsory licensing system. So anybody who is extracting fossil fuel, or rather any corporation that's extracting fossil fuel, would need to apply for a license. And the amount of licenses available would shrink each year. So in that way, you directly turn off the fossil fuel tap. You shrink the amount of available licenses, you force fossil fuels to remain in the ground. And we have explored various possibilities of how that could be enforced at an international level to ensure that selling illegally extracted fossil fuel become very difficult. The second system is a system of national allowances. So this is all about keeping countries to their fair shares. So what we don't want is, once fossil fuels become more scarce, we don't want the richest countries of the world to basically suck up all of the available fossil fuel. That wouldn't be just, and it wouldn't support transition. And so we need a system that allows countries to get their fair share. However, we also need to recognize and compensate for the fact that some countries are already using over their fair share and some are using under their fair share. So the national allowance system allows direct compensation from over-consumers to under-consumers in the short term while they converge on an equal and fast falling amount of fossil fuel use. The third element is a charge. So the extraction licenses that would be issued under the cap obviously wouldn't be given for free. They would be accompanied by a fee. And we've set that fee initially at $135 per tonne of CO2, and then rising at about 16% per year. That reaches some very high levels, ultimately. There's a reason why the charge in this scheme is so high. There's two good reasons. The first is that these are the levels of carbon charge that the IPCC recommends, as these are how high a carbon charge would need to go in order for climate mitigation to be successful. The second reason is that when fossil fuel supply is reduced, which it has to be in any meaningful climate justice scheme, a reduction in supply generally leads to an increase in the price. So if we didn't have a charge, that price increase would land with fossil fuel companies. And we've seen that happen in the last few years. There's been a restriction in fossil fuel supply, and then fossil fuel companies have put up the price and pocketed the difference. We don't want that to happen in this scheme. We want that extra inevitable price rise to land in a public pot so that money is available for the people to help us all through the transition. So the charge is extremely important in this system. Of course, the charge then creates a huge pot of money, and we have a number of ways in which that money would be used. The first way is to compensate countries and communities that leave their fossil fuels in the ground. We want to support positive action, and we want to make it possible for countries that have untapped fossil fuels to join this scheme. So although this proposal as a whole is extremely big and it's inevitably going to be challenging, it has been designed with political feasibility in mind. And this is one of the key features that relates to that. We want countries to be able to do the right thing. As Ecuador tried to do about 10 years ago, they asked the international community to pay for some of their fossil fuels underneath their national park to be left in the ground. That didn't happen. And unfortunately, those are now looking like they're going to be exploited. So this compensation element is really vital to make this politically feasible and socially just. The next way is that the money would be put in a people-owned intergenerational fund, and that fund would retain the money so that we're not burning through the resources of this in a single generation. Because of course, the money from the carbon charge is going to dry up after a couple of decades because we're reducing how much fossil fuel we're using very quickly. So we need to retain the benefits of this so that future generations can benefit as well. And that money then, importantly, would be used to fund a global Green New Deal. So it's being lent to or invested in renewable energy infrastructure in every country around the world, or every participating country where we're doing this in an international way. That then enables us to stop using fossil fuels and start using renewable energy, and also to redesign our societies with the transport, the housing, the industry that works for a green future. Funding a global Green New Deal has been a huge headache, I know, for a lot of climate justice activists. We believe this could be a really key part of the solution. Of course, once you have these businesses that then have a people share in them, that people's share generates an income source for the people of the world. And so we're then looking at what do we do with that income source? And that's coming in every year forever because their shares are retained. So we have reparations and redistribution made possible by this fund. So we will provide climate reparations to the most affected people and areas via grants for loss and damage, for adaptation and mitigation. So that's money coming in at a community level directly to the global south. And then the rest of the money we model as being redistributed to the global grassroots via monthly cash payments. So carbon dividend to every adult and every child in the world. We see that as a basic income as a human right. It means that every person, no matter what their circumstances, will always have a guaranteed to through the worst difficulties put on them by the climate crisis. Here's some numbers. We've done a lot of economic modeling in this paper because we wanted to really understand what is actually possible in this space. Is it really possible to bring meaningful levels of carbon dividend into people's pockets? Is it possible to do that at the same time as funding loss and damage, adaptation, mitigation, and building a Green New Deal? And so these numbers, I hope, give an answer to those questions. I'm not going to talk you through every number on the table, but the last three columns are probably the most interesting to look at. So the third from the right shows you how much money ends up in the fund, which, as you can see, gets very large. And it's worth pointing out that what that represents is people's ownership of the global economy, and especially of green energy. So we can have energy democracy because people's ownership is the foundation of democracy in the workplace and in the economy. And we have ultimately the people owning a larger and larger share of the key infrastructure of the world. The next column represents climate grants. So we've modeled 1 trillion. We've also modeled 2 trillion in climate grants. Obviously, that amount could be increased further if that was felt to be the priority. And then finally, the dividend per person. So it starts just over $30 per person and ends up leveling out at about $70 per person. Those amounts probably sound quite low to people in the global north. They certainly would not be low to people in much of the world, especially considering that goes to every member of a family. So $70 going to 2 adults and 2 children, that's $280 every single month for that family. That amount is enough to completely end extreme poverty worldwide, according to current definitions. So that means consigning poverty to the history books forever, which is absolutely what we're going to solve the climate crisis. So here's those numbers in slightly simpler form. So yeah, 80 trillion invested in a Green New Deal by 2050 and still rising, 1 trillion a year to the most affected people and areas, and $70 a month to every adult and child by 2050. This slide is possibly, to me, the most important slide in the pack, and possibly the most important feature of the cap and share proposal that we have put together. This shows you the overall global justice impact of all of the different features of this scheme. And what this table tells you, if you look at the column on the right, is that this proposal represents a massive transfer of wealth from the global north, who ultimately have caused the climate crisis, to the global south, who on the whole is experiencing the worst of its effects. This is in line with the demands for reparations and redistribution. This is what redistribution looks like. And for me, this is what climate justice looks like. Without redistribution, we don't have climate justice. We don't have global justice. So this, for me, is absolutely key. And as far as I know, there are not many costed climate justice proposals that can really look at this in a serious way at the amounts of money that need to shift around the world to achieve the goals that we're talking about. So I'll come back to this diagram as promised. I hope now it's become more obvious how the initiatives that you're working on would be supported by cap and share. So cap and share, the cap element, is really key for keeping fossil fuels in the ground. So for fossil fuel non-proliferation and all the great work that's been done on that treaty, this is a way of enabling that non-proliferation of fossil fuels to happen. It would massively reduce extractivism and therefore protect nature and biodiversity. And of course, in keeping fossil fuels in the ground and protecting nature, we're achieving decarbonisation and ultimately the mitigation that we need to keep our climate and temperature rises at a safe level. Then the share element, the way the money is moved in this system, can fund a global Green New Deal and bring about public ownership and energy democracy of that infrastructure. And also fund adaptation, loss and damage, reparations, redistribution, and tackle global inequality. So wherever you find yourself in this circle, I hope it's become more clear how the role that cap and share can play in the work that you're doing. And as I said, whatever you're working on, you probably need cap and share. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sid now, who's going to talk a little bit more about building the movement. But thanks very much for listening, and I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Laura, for a very great background to the issues of cap and share. And as we build up under the Cap and Share Climate Alliance, one of the critical things that we need to understand as movements, as organizations, and as climate practitioners and activists is that the Cap and Share model has largely been motivated by ensuring that we remain within the realms of mitigation and redistributive finance systems. As highlighted by Laura, you could see the nature of why climate justice is not enough for as long as there's no economic justice that has to come in, especially around issues of keeping fossil fuels in the ground. But also fossil fuels themselves have been actually become the center of the huge emissions that we experience within our globe. And keeping them in the ground would mean that each and every country and each and every region would be able to meet its nationally determined contributions as required within the Paris Agreement. And within that scope, it would also then mean that nations would not have to rely on forced solutions that are centered on nature-based solutions, but to begin to really keep fossil fuels in the ground from an equal right position, but also from the Cap and Share Climate Alliance position is we don't believe in net emission or zero net emission, net zero emission. We believe in zero, in total halting of extraction so that we just have got a zero emission in total. But also the understanding of where we are coming from is that different nations will begin to have localized climate finance models that are centered on issues of loss and damage, that are centered on climate finance, that could also begin to speak to other issues of just the transitions that they will be faced with. So instead of waiting for a never coming pledge from the global north or from UNFCCC around climate finance, different nations can now begin to get some financial benefit, especially if they become the first movers. And within the model of cap and share, those countries that would have required to become first movers will also then be compensated, will also be rewarded, and begin to call to say the fossil fuels that are remaining in the ground would also bring out financial benefits to communities. We also then need to amplify the voice of the most affected people, the indigenous peoples that are being affected by either displacement or relocation because of extractions that are taking place within the fossil fuel movement. So coming in, as you saw that circular diagram that Laura showed, it also then means that every other organization has got an opportunity to bring in its skill and its facilities. But the best way is the question that, so where is the money going to come from? What is likely going to be the resistance that are going to come from those countries that have been benefiting from fossil fuels, and fossil fuels either from extraction or but also fossil fuels in terms of selling their fossil fuels. So the model and the best approach is that we are going to use what we call country by country approach and targeting and building campaigns within each country, working with civil society within those countries to make them understand and simplify the issue of cap and share in such a way that it also then rewards the front runners, it also rewards the nations that would have decided to take upon cap and share as the best model moving forward. But because this has been an issue because of the limited climate financing coming to the global south, the question is building solidarity amongst the southerners themselves. But we also then require a solidarity of and an approach of a nexus between the south, the global south and the global north to ensure that the global north begins to understand the benefits that lie therein in terms of the cap and share mechanism, but also to embrace the opportunities that are within the global south, where most of the endowment of fossil fuels lie, and also the benefits in terms of their political and the democracy building and approaches, which would require communities to benefit and also communities to benefit from the challenges that they would have faced. We are also building a network of active campaigners, like I've said, through the the Cap and Share Climate Alliance. And this would be located within different global regions in this Asia, within Africa, in the Latin America and the Caribbean, and also partly to ensure that we begin to reach out to critical countries within the global north, so that we've got a composite approach in terms of what we are likely going to do. This approach in itself has to ensure that we're going to achieve our climate justice. We are going to uplift the socio-economic justice issues that communities have been faced with over perennial of years, but we are also going to emphasize on the issues of the north-south redistribution and of the basic income as a key climate justice analogy and also component to what we are likely going to be doing. So we are faced with key elements that as a community we are going to be looking at. And if you see this as a critical element that your organization is impressed with, that you would also want to become part of this big family, radical as it might look at, but each and every other step will have an opportunity to move forward. Equal Right is working within this space. As you can see from the post, you can join in and we can drive the space together and move forward and begin to challenge some of those neoliberal spaces that have been affecting people and continue to oppress communities. We also have to drive through this anti-capitalist movement that has made climate crisis and climate change more of a cash cow, more than climate change and climate justice as a human right phenomenon. So this is where we are, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Great. That was fabulous. And I think we're going to go to the next step, and I'll pass it back to Laura to introduce the discussants.
Actually, I'm going to hand over to Harjeet as our chair, who I think is ready to do that.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Mike and Laura. So yeah, thank you to Laura for really explaining the proposal. I think that it's really important for us to take a deep dive, and Sydney really complementing what Laura presented. And it's so important to talk about redistribution and putting forward some of these concrete proposals. And as Laura, you were mentioning, and just to share with everybody, I work with CAN, but also part of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which is demanding a treaty that should be complementary to Paris Agreement, because there is no mention of fossil fuels, neither in the convention nor in the Paris Agreement. So imagine the cause of the problem is missing from the conversation. For the first time, we discussed fossil fuels. That was COP26, and that too, it was just a foot in the door, where we talked about coal and inefficient subsidies and really not tackling it head on. And we still do not have that mechanism. And various streams of discussions under UNFCEC, no wholesome discussion on how do we really tackle the issue of fossil fuels. And that's what is needed. And that's why treaty, and Laura very rightly said, what you presented as part of Cap and Share is one of the ways to really further define. We know what is needed. Treaty talks about how it can be achieved in terms of that global mechanism. This approach really helps us think through various ways how money can be raised, and we can demand for redistributive justice. So really important. And now I would like to invite our three discussants. I'm going to first invite Emilia Reyes, who is the program director at Equidad de Genero, a feminist justice organization based in Mexico, and works with a wide range of justice networks at the national and international levels. And I had a pleasure of being with her in a couple of events. So Emilia, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Harjeet. Very happy to see you here. And hello, colleagues. I'm super excited to be in this space. I'm very honored to be invited as well as to comment. First of all, I want to say that the thing that I think is most welcome is the imagination and the radical willingness to dream of a different world and put all of their heart and knowledge into technical proposals that might challenge the current global and financial architecture. I think that is very bold. I think that is very much needed, especially in the face of the current financial architecture that is extremely obsolete, and it's a shelter for criminals in the global north, for the criminals of global corporations, for the wealthier 1%, for the financial sector, asset managers, and overall the fossil fuels industry. So this radical challenge is precisely the thing that we need. And I think this is also a lesson that is coming from the intersection of the discussion between economic justice, environmental justice, and social justice. And I think this is the best example of what happens when all of the movements collide and dream together and bring proposals together to the table. So I just want to say that for a start, because not many people dare to think and to imagine how would it look like this new world, and you have done it. So congratulations to this coalition, and especially today, this paper that is convening us. But I see also in the chat that there are many others, so very much look forward to reading this. If it were for me, I would say I would cap and share everything. As you say, Laura, at the beginning, what we're seeing now is not just the climate emergency, is really that we're trespassing all of the planetary boundaries. Some months ago, we went over the 7th. So we are really in a very huge risk of the threat, to see the threat of life as we know it, to go over some tipping points with no points of return. So I think that is extremely scary, and we need to really sit down together and imagine and realize, take stock of what is happening and really push forward. So I think this type of initiative is great. And just wanted to say, of course, that the paper lays out many nuances of this proposal, but especially it starts as well with saying that it is a complementary part of the big picture, for instance, in trying to ensure tax justice through UN tax convention, through debt justice, through not only a debt workout mechanism, but also debt cancellation for southern countries, through trade justice, etc. But I think this mechanism of cap and share can be very easily translated into many other points of entry. And I was concerned, to be honest, with this noise in my head when I was reading the proposal on just focusing on fossil fuels, on what is happening to mining, right? Because the green transition is going to happen at the expense of the global south, with all of the mining extraction that is going to happen on rare minerals and all of the material components that are needed, especially now that we see that it's the global north that is demanding all of these extraction at the expense on the destruction of the biodiversity integrity. So the end of the world is not going to come for climate change, but because we are eradicating our ecosystem integrity. But there is a proposal here. I think the coalition has a challenge to expand on the component, the relation between transiting for a new economy with targeting very closely what is going to happen with the extraction of minerals. But let me tell the audience, for those who haven't read the paper, that there is a connection there, as well as addressing what will happen with other sectors like the food systems chain of process, etc. So I really invite everybody to read this paper because it's very thorough in the proposal. It's very generous. I think it's also very generous in this conception about human beings, but that's very nice because we also need hope, right? So I also love that it's based on the notion of fair share. So throughout the different stages, the fair share is at the forefront of this discussion. And I just want to say again that the fair share needs to be balanced out, not balanced out, but added to or strengthened with a proposal for the growth for the global north, for the wealthier, and for those sectors that are harmful, right? We need to really make a connection on degrowth, because I think that even though we try to work on the monetized side of economy, meaning the money that is circulating in the world, I always keep on having this Zoom background, because this yellow part is the subsidy that women are doing through their unpaid domestic and care work. So the real economy is the non-monetized economy. So how are we going to address that? And so there are many components that we need to bring into the conversation also on the non-monetized side. And so really the shift of paradigm and the shift of economic consumption and production needs to happen very quickly, especially in the global north, also to stop the subsidy that women are doing to the global economy, as well as the indigenous people subsidy. So targeting those inequalities that are structural. I think this paper focuses very strongly on the subsidy done by the global south. So just adding those components would be great, but precisely because of this is thinking about how are we going to think on all of those challenges that are being posed by the current neoliberal capitalistic system. So thinking further, not for this coalition, but for all of us, right? Because this coalition has given us so much, but I think the articulation of the global financial architecture, the proposals of the growing, adding on of these components on the global subsidies, I think it would be extremely important. I also think that the way this has been presented, there are models that are costing different scenarios, which is, I think, very important. Even the externalizing cost of the fossil fuels industry to the consumers, I think that is also very important to consider. The thing that immediately comes when you cap and charge these industries, the thing they're gonna do is to externalize the cost to the consumers, right? But there are also proposals here that can be applied anywhere precisely and into allocating price caps. And I think this is the type of thing that we need. For instance, now in Latin America and in the global south, we're seeing human rights defenders now lives being threatened now because of the extraction of lithium, of cadmium, etc. So price caps, nationalizing the industries, evaluating what are we going to do, and to try to focus on the benefit of those territories that hold those minerals and those resources is key, so that this proposal on cap and share is not only about, oh, we need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. It's really for, if you have them, you need to make use of them in a rational way for the benefit of your territories, to address inequalities, to deliver, for instance, electricity to those countries that do not have it, at the same time to reduce the consumption on those countries that have done enough in destroying the world. So the rational planning of this, I think, is a big challenge, but I think this would be the best point of entry, because I also see with the proposal model of going from country to country and in a small cooperation process is very feasible. So I just really want to invite everybody to read this proposal. I think my time is up, but as you can see, I'm very excited about this proposal. There are so many challenges for the imagination, for the operation, but we need to take on those challenges as collective challenges and to start moving forward from this point. Thank you so much for the coalition. Wishing you all the best. Of course, Equidad will join, and we will be one of the main proponents of this ideas of cap and share everything in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emilia. I can see many people, including me, share your excitement and definitely some of the aspects that you highlighted in terms of fair share. Before I invite the next discussant, I must say that we have been demanding system change for a very long time, but now the onus is upon us to actually come up with very concrete proposals. And this is one such attempt to put forth. We know, some of us were there at the Paris summit, where we know our leaders are not ready for the transformation that is needed. They're talking about reform. They're talking about just tinkering with the system and not really that transformation. So yeah, and we need to continue to provide very concrete proposals. I know there are many questions in the chat to further detail and the concerns whether the money reaches the communities or not. So we'll take that up, but let me now invite the next discussant, Abel Musumali, who's a climate negotiator in the Zambian delegation to the UNFCCC, a member of African Group of Negotiators Expert Support. and the founder of Abel Musumali Foundation, which is a development and humanitarian organization based in Zambia. So Abel, over to you.
Thank you so much. For me, I think it's just very brief. Yeah, so I think it's very important that policymakers are actively involved in these issues, and in the African context, there are quite a number of mechanisms that do bring together heads of state and government to discuss issues of climate change, and one of them being the CAHOSC. So the CAHOSC stands for the Committee of African Heads of State and Government under the African Union. I believe that if we are to take also the policy or the political process very seriously in these issues of carbon offsetting and trading and climate justice, the heads of state, they should be brought to speed as well, in as much as we are discussing these highly technical stuff, so that even as they sit to make decisions, they are making well-informed decisions that are in the interest of their people. As I earlier mentioned, I think for Africa, it's time that a global pricing carbon mechanism is established, and we are looking forward to the actualization of the Article 6, of the Paris Agreement at COP28, so that these issues of carbon marketing, a clear mechanism should be put in place to begin to deal with mitigation measures at a larger scale, that is supported by decisions that will be agreed upon in regards to Article 6 framework. And also just to emphasize again that in as much as we are discussing issues of climate justice, having minds on the team. I'm speaking from the negotiation point of view. Strong legal minds, on these national negotiations is very important to understand text, because sometimes text in these negotiations, if overlooked, it can actually be misinterpreted. And such has been one of issues that have been actually, delaying decisions, because it is more like, bordering on legal understanding. So climate justice will need also to ensure that the legal people are well informed about these issues we are discussing, same as the political people, in this case the executive. Also, just to to air out and to take advantage of the abundance of natural resources that which we have, and begin to add value on some of these resources, in as much as the global south are looking for resource and help from the global north, but I think it is also time that the global south also took advantage of the abundance of the natural resources and add value on those resources, to begin to mobilize climate financing for adaptation measures, and also to raise, to improve the livelihoods of people, and to build the resilience in those most affected communities. The Africa Climate Week is an important event, I think, in Nairobi next month, because of a component of also heads of state, and I think it's an event that will be able to learn quite a lot of issues moving forward ahead of COP28. For now, I think these are some of the few issues I feel like sharing with the team. but obviously, lastly, it's that the phrase of phasing down core, phasing out it's a very critical issue. As agreed during the Glasgow summit, that instead of phasing out the use of core, there were suggestions of phasing down. So the phasing down process, it can take long, depending with the economic circumstances of each particular country. But at COP28, perhaps maybe we could see maybe a new twist, regarding the phasing down or the phasing out of core, and countries like India and those that are using core at a larger scale, like Poland, had a very a strong objection in this case, because of obviously coal being one of the main source of energy. But if we were to go green and also to achieve the net zero by the year 2050, it is time to invest in green innovations that will provide a win-win situation for both those that are already developed and those that are developing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abel. You've touched on a number of issues. I'm not going to make a comment on that because we have very little time. I'm going to hand over back to Mike so that we can open the floor and have some Q&A. Mike, over to you.
Thanks. I do have some questions here in the chat, just to get things kicked off and get the juices flowing. And I think this one might go over to Sid. Are there any upcoming conferences or events where CAP and Share Climate Alliance members will be, where people can maybe meet up in person? We'll be doing lots of virtual outreach as well, but Sid, are you there? Are you able to mention any events coming up?
Thanks, Mike. The initial event that we are going to be having is during the BRICS Summit, which is taking place in South Africa. From the BRICS Summit will be there from the 23rd to the 25th of August. But many organizations have decided to have a pre-BRICS Summit event at University of Johannesburg. Basically, the motivation to this is because the BRICS convention has become almost like the second biggest emitter, albeit the fact that it is located largely in the global south. So we are beginning to see a new corporate of emitters emerging from the global south, and the continued use of fossil fuels as an excuse of trying to justify the fact that nothing is coming from the global north. But we still find that the BRICS put together and other emerging countries that are likely going to be joining the BRICS are going to continue emitting, and we are not going to meet our global targets as we foresee and as we anticipate. We are also going to be having, sadly, we are still continuing to do this virtually. We are going to be having regional launch of the same, targeting Africa, targeting Asia, and also targeting Latin America in the next few months as well. Then there's also going to be the Africa Climate Action Week, which is going to be in Nairobi from the 2nd to the 8th of September. This is going to be a physical space, and Equal Right will be there. We'll also be anticipating to have collaboration and side events with organizations such as PAGJA, FEMNET, and other progressive organizations that also believe in the cap and share mechanism. So we are beginning to have interactions physically, and we continue to anticipate that in the next 1 year, the space of physical mobilization and interaction and petitioning will begin to be more visible as we grow. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Yes, and that would be great. COP28 will be also a great way to connect and get folks together. Okay, so I'm going to move to a little bit more technical question now, and I believe this may go to Autonomy or Adrien Fabre. or if anyone else of the discussants have an input, are you aware of any study having implemented a carbon and cap, or in this case, cap and share policy in a quantitative simulation model, such as an IAM, integrated assessment model? Does anyone want to step in for that one?
Yeah, I can step in here if you want. So
Thank you.
I've done some work on that myself, and I'm conducting some further work right now. So integrating IAMs from the IPCC and seeing the distributive effects of a cap and share using these simulations. You can find those in the policy brief that I've posted in the chat. And I have to give a disclaimer that there are some uncertainties here. The big one is on the carbon price. Second one is that I couldn't find data on carbon footprint, just on territorial emissions. So this is a first imprecision in the computation. Yeah, those are the big ones I want to say. And also on the I'll keep it here. But
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
so there are some estimates, and basically yes, it's a north-south redistribution.
Yes, thank you. Did Autonomy want to weigh in as well?
I'm not sure that Autonomy's economist Luis Garcia is here at the moment. He's in Brazil, so it's also a terrible time zone.
Time zones.
So,
okay, no problem.
But I can just comment on how we did this in our report, which is so working with Luis, he has access to carbon footprint data broken down by percentile in each country. So we were able to look at what are the price effects on people according to how much fossil fuel they use in relation to their income. And then that is how we worked out the table I showed you about global redistributive impacts. That's where that data comes from.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, moving to next question from Erica Levinson. She says, thank you for the wonderful presentations. I wanted to ask for some more details about the citizen oversight aspect and how that is practically envisioned, especially investment of people's fund money in local climate adaptation and mitigation members. Thanks so much.
Is that one to me? Shall I go ahead?
It could be to you. I have a sentence or two I'd add after you're done.
Cool. So in our paper, we talk about a couple of different possibilities for citizen oversight. The two main models are either to further democratize the UN, and there's some really good organizations working on that, or probably a more ideal option is to establish a new organization directly from the people of the world that we've called as citizens, that we've called the Climate Commons Trust. And in parallel, the Climate Commons Fund. We see that as being overseen by ultimately a people's assembly coming from the people of the world. So people are effectively selected at random, similar to how jury service is done, at least in my country, and then upskilled to take part in decision making that oversees and ultimately sets things like the ethical investment policy, decides the sharing of amounts between the different ways of spending and investing the money, oversees to ensure that that there's a fair geographical spread of spending and of investment. This was tried out at I believe COP26. So the organization Global Assembly brought together, they did a really clever sampling method and pulled together a group of 100 people who were representative in terms of location, education level, even in terms of views about climate change. They brought together those 100 people and tasked them with coming up with a proposal or a statement articulating what they wanted from the COP26. And so that provides a model that I know that organization is continuing to work and develop that. So there's options there. Of course, none of these options are simple. But ultimately, nothing that we're doing to address climate justice is simple. These are huge, huge challenges in the world. We need a step change in how we operate as a global community. And we're trying to suggest a direction of travel, but a practical and hands-on and workable and costed direction of travel. But of course, the details ultimately need to be worked out as we go in a democratic way.
Yeah, excellent. And yeah, just to follow on one more item, because democracy is one of the values that we want to embed in the process, and we don't want it to just be an expert-led, expert-directed. When I say expert, you know what I'm talking about in the world. And with all due respect, some of us are economists, but we can't just leave it to that behind the scenes aspect anymore. So we would like to have citizen involvement and direct democracy if possible. And the concept of a global climate trust or a commons trust has been part of Cap and Share since the beginning. So yeah, but the details are difficult, and it's easy to step on toes with that. So it's not all covered yet, but we'll get there. Okay, good. Anyone else have any comments on that topic before we go to the next question? Okay. So next question from Elena at UBI Lab Network. Some money will fund a Green New Deal, but once the Green New Deal is happening, is a separate mechanism needed to redistribute wealth from new green technology, or can Cap and Share be easily adapted to share that?
Okay, so the two are really closely woven together, so it doesn't need adaptation. It's worked into the system as it is. So ultimately, we see the money funds the Green New Deal. There's two different mechanisms for funding the Green New Deal. There's a grant system and a loan system, but let me talk about the loan-based system for now. So it funds the Green New Deal via either making loans to companies, cooperative communities that want money to build wind farms, establish, build new public transport networks, and so on. Either makes loans, it can make investments, so buy shares in those companies, or it can make direct investments. So that means ultimately the people of the world via the fund directly setting up organizations to put in place this infrastructure. We don't have to wait for the private sector to kind of step up and do it. We can make it happen as a global people. And then because those activities are income generating, and income generating, I would say in a broadly ethical way, like, the wind is up there blowing around for free, and if you put in place some wind turbines to harvest it, you've pulled down a genuinely new source of real wealth. And so there's a real flow of wealth then that can come into the public pot, and that will come in every year. The wind keeps blowing, the people keep on owning the wind farm. That flow of wealth comes into the public pot every year. That provides the income that then provides both the climate grants that then feed into the Green New Deal as well, if that's what the most affected people in areas, the global south communities that receive them, decide to use the money for, and that money funds the dividends. And so the dividends can continue in perpetuity, and they're basically coming from the income that is derived from the Green New Deal infrastructure. I don't know if that was clear. I apologize if it isn't. And I just want to say, please feel free to email me after this to clarify anything that isn't clear, because I recognize this is a huge paper. We also have a shorter version of the paper coming out imminently as soon as we can get it finished with the designers. So if you're struggling with 100 pages, there's 16 pages coming out soon.
Great, thank you. And I think, Laura, if it's okay, we'll just do one more question. It'll be sort of a wrap-up question. And I'm seeing the chat looks really great. I'm excited about all those questions. So hopefully we'll be able to capture those questions and put them into a Q&A document. So maybe Lucy or someone can capture those we don't get to on this call, and we can have some written materials to follow up. So we really appreciate your input, everyone, with the questions. I'm going to summarize a few questions into one big question, which is impossible to answer. We always like to take on the impossible, right? How can we make this happen? Because maybe this sounds too unrealistic or too pie in the sky. And I know campaigners sometimes take on impossible problems, and eradicating global poverty and taking on climate change all at once seems like a big ask. How can we get from where we are today in the world to the end? And all we need is basically a theory of change, or in a couple sentences, something like that. Laura, do you want to start? And then we'll open it up to other speakers from today, and that'll help us wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, the way we're proposing to do this, and the way we're working to do this already, is by finding some front runner countries that could work together. So we're looking to ideally find partners in the global north. We're exploring potential with Norway, which already has a large oil fund and has a sense that they're too rich already and they've made their money in a bad, polluting way. They're ready to redistribute in some respects. And partners in the global south, we're exploring possibilities with a number of countries in Africa at the moment. We're interested in some countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, other countries in Asia. So we'll be looking to build the network in those countries, working with civil society, engaging and co-creating with activists that are already working on climate justice in those communities, developing a proposal together that we can then take forward and ideally create a cap and share system, starting with those front runner countries. And then presuming that that's successful, the benefits will then start to become clear to more countries. Hopefully more countries will join on, and gradually it can build from there. None of that is to say that is in any way easy, and I often don't sleep at night worrying about how we will ever get this implemented. But in as much as I can articulate it, that is the plan. I don't know if Sid, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, true, Laura. The ability to articulate is the first step, and that articulation would convince one country to the next. We also are proud that there are a lot of organizations that are beginning to see an alternative entry point towards climate justice, and the fact that communities themselves that are supposed to be, that are affected by climate disasters and climate shocks, will end up having a bit of a dollar in their pocket, will also equally become motivated. And governments that have been seen to be renegading on social service delivery within their own nations will begin to be viewed as being responsive to the vote that any other individual would have been posed through. We are looking at more of reinvigorating and realigning the political economies of different nations by simply allowing the endowment of what they have to pay for the changes that we want to see. So it's a huge transformative agenda that we have, but small organizations coming together, small organizations having conversations would begin to replicate in different regions for different reasons, but also occupation of different platforms that are all over the world to begin to introduce the cap and share model as an alternative, sustainable, and justified mechanism that the globe can begin to undertake at this present moment will be the first place to ensure that implementation with its own resistance, but with a continued push for the core that, yes, it is possible, and yes, we can. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you. And that's a great place to end it, I believe. I think we're up at time right now, but with all the feedback in the chat, we'll have to follow up. And we believe this is just the first of many conversations around these topics. Please reach out to your networks and please help us join and build this movement, because that's how we will get from here to there. Laura, any other final words, or should we wrap up at that time? And thank you to Harjeet as the chair as well.
Yeah, I'd just really like to thank everybody that's come. I'd really like to thank the facilitators, the chair, the discussants, and everybody from the Cap and Share Climate Alliance, and all of you for coming. Thank you very much for engaging with this huge and what must in some ways seem like an unfathomable and slightly, bizarre, ridiculous idea. It's enormous. What we're trying to do here is enormous, but it's enormous because it does what needs to be done, and that's difficult to articulate. We've tried hard to get it across, but we really want to talk with you. We want to talk with you. We want to work with you, and we hope you will join us on this difficult, complicated path that we're going to evolve as we go. So please get in touch. Please join the Alliance. We really look forward to hearing from you. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day.